Tom Welling has shed some light on why the Crisis on Infinite Earths cameo was his first appearance as Clark Kent after Smallville, and it makes perfect sense. While many people refer to Christopher Reeves as delivering one of the greatest adaptations of Superman to date, Tom Welling is absolutely a contender for tackling the character of Clark Kent. His time on Smallville, over a decade, as he refined the character and unpacked the origin like no other iteration before or since legendary. And, in many ways, Smallville's success was a clear influence for the CW to move forward and create something as imaginative and far-reaching as the Arrowverse. However, actor Tom Welling avoided reprising the character after the show ended in 2011, despite the popularity of his portrayal. Which also led to the Arrowverse making contact in the hopes of securing a cameo from the actor long before the Crisis on Infinite Earths storyline. Tom Welling explained why Smallville didn't cross over with the Arrowverse until Crisis on Infinite Earths. The time wasn't right for Welling's Clark Kent. While attending a comic convention in New Orleans, Welling was asked about his cameo in the massive crossover event which led into the conclusion of the Arrowverse, and he gave an insightful answer. Specifically, he highlighted how this story was not the first time he was contacted about making an appearance, and despite the Arrowverse success, Welling was hesitant to come on board. But the more interesting detail is why Tom Welling chose not to appear in the Arrowverse earlier. The reason he provided above indicates that Welling was being careful and very particular about how his version of Clark Kent would be presented. He had a vision for that character, and one that he spent a decade building, so coming back in the right way was crucially important. And with the way his character was eventually brought back, it did make sense for this version of the character to opt into a life that saw him step out of the spotlight, and putting his family above everything else. How Tom Welling's Arrowverse crossover comments make Crisis on Infinite Earths more special. Tom Welling had strong feelings about Clark Kent's future. Knowing that Welling had the opportunity to come back, on what appeared to be multiple occasions, makes the one time he did choose to return to the role all the more special. Had he returned earlier, or in some other way, it would certainly have had an impact on the rest of the Arrowverse, due to how popular his character was. It may have led to Welling returning several times, or even potentially the creatives choosing to stick with his casting and never hire Tyler Hoechlin to play the part of Superman. If that was the case, the likelihood would have been that the show Superman and Lois was never made. So, in a way, Welling's choice could well have saved not only his version of the character, but also cleared the path for Hoechlin to take over the role. On top of that, Welling clearly felt that the idea of how Clark would return in Crisis was fitting for the character, and thus preserved the legacy that he spent so many years building. Ultimately, that makes his cameo all the more worthwhile and meaningful. When Tom Welling could have appeared in the Arrowverse before Crisis, the Arrowverse took time to find its Superman. Considering Smallville wrapped up in 2011, and the CW went on to launch Arrow in 2012, it's very possible that the people working on that series could have envisioned crossovers for Welling's Clark Kent. They introduced the Flash early on, but it took several more years for them to cast a version of Superman, and even then, that was in connection to the Supergirl series, which debuted in 2015. With that in mind, Welling may have received multiple calls from 2012 about reprising his role, and finally donning the suit. It would make a lot of sense if the creatives also approached Welling when it came time to bring Kara Danvers to the Arrowverse, potentially hoping to set him up as her mentor, in a similar way to how they brought Tyler Hoechlin in. However, all of this would have meant the Arrowverse either had to align itself more to the history established in Smallville, or it would have reversed a lot of the progress the show had made in its run. After all, Smallville had its own versions of Arrow, The Flash, and Supergirl. Thankfully, Welling's choice to avoid appearing until Crisis was the right call for both Smallville and the Arrowverse.